I guess we're recording. Oh boy.
And so it begins. I'm gonna read this program real quick. Bro, where are your round reports at though?
Bruh. We have 2 round reports. I'm like 95% sure. We haven't broken anything new. So,
Is that gonna change right now?
if I told you, then we might break something. I don't know. We'll see. It depends how fast we can work in the next 15 minutes.
8 minutes.
How about y'all? Are y'all gonna break something new?
Probably not. We have disclosed a couple cases though, so it's like I don't know how helpful the answer is either way.
Oh, also real quick, can y'all start the email chain?
Yeah, for sure. Send email. And Abby, I'm assuming you do want to be in the chain. Yes, yeah. Judge Guo, would you like to be added to any email chains we create?
Sure. Send you my email address.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so I have everyone's emails. I'm going to hold off from sending the email until we get the last judge in the room so we can ask them if they want to participate on it. But yeah, I'm pretty good for that.
Yeah, if you could, can you put your school and first or second speaker and your after your name? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Are we still missing a judge?
It looks like we're missing a judge.
Should we send an email?
How many judges? We have 3, right?
Yeah, but only 2 are here.
Okay. Chris is tech support. Okay.
Someone from the TOC is literally in here, so I think they know.
Yeah.
Y'all hear me now?
Cool. Looks like we got a new judge, so they should be on the way.
All right. I think Judge McCrary just came in.
Great. So
Hi, Kale.
I'm going to send out the email chain then, looking at that everyone here. Yeah, all right, chain is sent. Let me know when you get it.
Cool. We noticed that sometimes our internet issues, so we're going to send our case doc with cut cards below. The text we read is unformatted cut card text. We're not paraphrasing, and I hope that allows everyone to follow along easier.
Thank you.
We'll let you know when the email is sent, and then we'll be good to go.
Great, case is sent. Yeah, whenever anyone gets it, I'm going to start reading.
I just got it.
Perfect. All right. Seeing that everyone is ready, my time will begin my first word. My brother and I are proud to negate the resolution resolved. Japan should revise Article 9 of its constitution to develop offensive military capabilities, and our sole contention is threatening the world. Even after the fall of Imperial Japan, the world still remembers their war crimes. Vogel 17 confirms that any weakening of Japan's pacifist credo is expected to anger China and South Korea, where many still harbor bitter memories of Japan's war atrocities committed during World War II. Japan acting as a normal country without Article 9 in place will aggravate tensions, escalating currently regional security dilemmas. This risks war in two places, and first is collapsing trilateral cooperation. North Korea looks to be on the warpath, as Troy 22 finds that a collision course could lead to the outbreak of a second Korean War, as South Korea's domestic politics pour salt in North Korea's wound. Yoon has taken a hardline position on security, suggesting that South Korea should launch a preemptive strike against Pyongyang. However, the US, South Korea, and Japan are working together to deter North Korea in a status quo. Lee S22 writes, as the Japanese Prime Minister and South Korean President agrees to ramp up three-way ties with the United States in responding to North Korea's evolving military threats. However, by angering and threatening South Korea with the perception of militarization, this progress would end. Wadsworth 20 concludes that Japan-ROK military relations could easily spiral out of control. Japan adopted an offensive capability at a time when enhanced trilateral cooperation is important. Japan advancing legislation to allow for conventional capabilities would likely derail those efforts. Absent this cooperation, war is on the table. Smith 21 finds that a lack of trilateral cooperation makes deterring North Korea difficult. North Korea could use nuclear weapons through miscalculation. Dealings with North Korea are singularly prone to such problems. Allies cannot afford to send muddled messages. If North Korea believes it can split the alliance, deterrence will be weakened, Pyongyang will be emboldened to use force to challenge territorial agreements, and destruction will be felt far and wide, including nuclear attacks on US cities. Second, a military Japan threatens China. Decades of resentment over Japanese war crimes have festered in East Asia, never fully going away. Sterling 20 writes that China will dislike whatever changes Japan proposes, which it will always perceive as a sign of Japanese remilitarization. This signal far outpaces any deterrence Japan has, as Sankey 21 finds Japanese military power is sufficient to heighten Chinese insecurities, but insufficient to help slow East Asia's deteriorating military balance. Stebbing 17 concludes that for countries like China who view Japanese remilitarization as a threat, their reactions would undoubtedly be to maximize their own security by expanding their military capabilities. It would trigger an arms race as China attempts to match this, paving the way for future conflicts. But more than an arms race, this could push China to war, as Backley 21 concludes that China attacks not when it feels confident about the future, but when it worries its enemies are closing in. Beijing turns violent when confronted with the prospect of permanently losing control of territory, and it rarely gives advance warnings. The PLA's weapon of choice is a first strike. A Pentagon Defense report in 2014 finds that China's willingness to execute a first strike is rooted in China's strategic culture. For the PLA, first strike and preemption are their modus operandi. The Chinese are likely to execute first strikes when they perceive their interests to be threatened, and they have a hair trigger on this attack. Thus, the existential fear of Japanese remilitarization would prompt a strike, as Wadsworth 19 finds that Beijing would consider preemption of Japanese strike capabilities, causing a premature escalation of the crisis that would undoubtedly draw in the US. And China believes they can win conventional superiority in such a strike, as when simulated, Hamza 18 writes that a Chinese first strike against US facilities in Japan, using just 20% of their ballistic missiles, would struck every US ship in port in Japan and cratered every runway within the first few minutes. By being forced to lash out at a US ally, this would risk an escalation to global conflict. Payne 16 finds that another world war could cause death levels beyond the 100 million souls lost in World Wars I and II. To save their lives, to not risk conflict, we negate.
Okay, perfect. I'll send our case real quick and then we'll get started. All right, it is sent. Let me know when you get it. Did you all get it?
Just got it. You're good.
Okay, perfect. All right, this is Aditya speaking first for Frem. We are affirming speaking second in the round. Is everybody ready? All right. Then we affirm contention 1 is space. The US is inviting Japanese space collaboration as Hitchens 20 confirms that the US Space Force has opened the doors to Japan. Crucially, the US inviting this collaboration is key because collaboration is key to deterrence. Olympicus 19 determines that given the disproportionate advantages they provide, alliances are critical to deterrence. Close cooperation with space allies would be a critical part of the US space resiliency strategy and operational interests of deterrence. Gleason 18 provides the warranting that the willingness of rivals to abandon aggression will depend on their perception of US strength and their allies and partnerships. The US military space resources are limited and prioritized, so when another nation invests in security assets, pooling resources lightens the burden on the United States. Furthermore, the strength of a partner is often judged by the level of resources they're willing to provide. Hitchens 21 confirms that offensive space weapons are a necessary part of that deterrent. Fortunately, Dominguez 22 explains that the challenge for Japan is that constitutional restrictions prevent the possession of offensive space capabilities. Akimoto 20 furthers that in recent years, Japan has begun to be considered something of a space power in areas such as robotics. However, Japan's military space policy has been restricted by the influence of Article 9. Mancrez 07 furthers that when projects potentially feature military applications, the future of Japan's space development appears tentative. The nation's restrictive development of defense-related space policies have prevented Japan from developing. To put it simply, offensive deterrence is key. The impact is deterring satellite strikes, as AIA 18 explains that the reality of satellite collapse is all too possible. Russia, China, and other actors have recognized America's growing dependence on satellites and are actively developing counter-space capabilities. As White 20 laments, Russian and Chinese space weapons could plunge the West into a dark ages with a crashed economy, which Bradford 13 terminalizes would send 900 million people back into poverty in the event of that economic shock. Contention 2 is North Korea. North Korea is back and worse than ever. Less than just a month ago, BBC 22 reports that North Korea had tested a banned ICBM for the first time since 2017 and fell in Japanese waters after flying for over an hour. The reason they shot it in the Japanese waters is because of Article 9, as Jones 17 explains that Article 9 stipulates that Japan can only intercept missiles that are due to land in its territory. After understanding these legal constraints, it becomes clear that by firing a missile over Japan, North Korea calculated that Japan's elaborate missile defenses would have to sit idle and increase their chances of a successful test. Crucially, this is a recipe for disaster in two ways. First is miscalculation. Schemmler 18 explains that the potential for accidents remains high, especially with untested systems. Future successes are not guaranteed, and should a further North Korean missile overflying fail at the wrong moment during its powerless flight phases, a trajectory may come to resemble an attack on Japan. But second is error, as Farrell 17 explains that the US would have been forced to immediately attack North Korea had the missile Pyongyang fired over Japan actually hit its territory. That would have plunged the world into an all-out war. Even if they retaliated with conventional weapons against North Korea, it would escalate straight away, and this causes extinction, as Wickman 18 finds. In sum, a nuclear exchange of arsenals between only two nuclear powers would end civilization everywhere. Contention 3 is reinvigorating Japan's democracy. The Economist 21 writes, since 1955, Japan's LDP has dominated the country's politics, and the party has ruled uninterrupted. This stranglehold on government is causing nationalism to spread, as Gentry 20 writes that the LDP tends towards nationalistic policies. As opposition fragmented after 2012, the ruling party's candidates found it electorally advantageous to appeal to core supporters rather than centrist voters. Ultimately, this is why Hoffman 20 reports that Japan's three leading newspaper agrees that Japan's democracy is in a crisis. Fortunately, affirming changes this, as Murata 19 finds that Japan needs to amend its constitution to avoid political cynicism. A two-party system would emerge based on public debate of the pros and cons of constitutional amendments. This is vital, as the impact is nuclear nationalism. China has responded to Japanese nationalism with huge condemnation. Rising nationalism in both countries has historically created the very real danger of confrontation between the two superpowers. This is catastrophic, as a conflict between China and Japan drags the US in, as Ball 14 writes, if Beijing and Tokyo engage in conflict, the prospects of direct Sino-American nuclear escalation come into play. Matthews 19 terminalizes that limited nuclear war is capable of killing 2 billion people. It is for those reasons we are proud to affirm.
Great, let's do cross. Can I ask the first question?
Yep, go for it.
Sure. So your argument on C2 is that if there isn't the availability of Japanese waters, they won't be able to shoot missiles everywhere or anywhere in the world, right? So they can't test.
So we kind of have like two warrants, right? So first is like miscalculation. If they're shooting missiles in the direction of Japan, they're more likely to miscalculate. Second, we would just say error. Like North Korea's had a lot of errors with their missile tests. If they shoot one over Japan and it's erroneous, then there's going to be the US retaliation that comes through it. So
Do they
in a
shoot
way,
them over Japan or into the Sea of
yeah,
Japan?
they've literally shot them over the territorial country of Japan, and then it lands in the sea. That's what they've been doing so far. Okay, could I take a question on your case?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about like your first argument for a second, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about, sorry, I'm just pulling up the piece of evidence I wanted to ask about.
Sure.
So this trilateral cooperation, right? So South
Yeah.
Korea, as you know, recently elected a new president. That new
Yes.
president, as you said, has been very, very adamant about increasing trilateral cooperations between Japan, US, and South Korea. Why would
Yeah.
they not? What is the warranting behind the reasoning that this new president, who really wants a strong military bulwark against North Korea, doesn't want Japan to have arms?
So it's important to remember the military past that Japan has. They were imperial. They created massive war crimes on both South Korea and Japan. So that memory has never really faded from South Korean consciousness. That's why a fun statistic to know is that a majority of South Koreans would support North Korea in a war against Japan. Because in the end, as long as Japan is a military country with the ability to impose their will on others, they are so afraid of them that even their fear of North Korea goes to the wayside. Let me ask you a question
So
about
can
your
I
argument about nationalism.
Sure.
So you say that two-party countries aren't nationalist. Do you think the US and Britain aren't nationalist?
So I would say it's a little bit about the national. It's about the rise in the nationalism, right? Even in the U.S. and Britain, even if we were to say that they were a little bit nationalist, there's still checks on power and what they've been able to do. Whereas the LDP has been increasingly nationalist. Like Abe was already super nationalist, but then Kishida is arguably even more nationalist. And because
Kishida
there's
is not
no check
arguably
on,
more nationalist.
I mean, like a lot
Kishida's
of people would
policies
argue
go very
Kishida's
far back from
more
Abe's rhetoric
nationalist.
and nationalism.
Okay. But I mean, the Richter analysis is pretty good. That there's been a rise in like Japanese nationalism. Also, we have the uniqueness evidence from like this year that says that Japan's democracy is like backsliding more and more and more, which means China has responded to this with condemnation, and they don't like that rise in
Yeah,
nationalism because they're
why can't they
nationalist.
just still be nationalist even as a two-party system?
So so this is a really important point. So what our Murata evidence is really clear, is that because of the two clashes in parties, they've been appealing to this one wasn't our Murata evidence. It was my bad, our Gentry evidence. So this is really key, that because they've been since 2012, since the fracturing of any opposition, they found it advantageous to appeal to the core super traditional supporters rather than having to cater to the centrist, which is a lot less nationalist.
We're gonna take some prep.
That was 125. Is everyone ready? It's gonna be top down. It might be a little bit expedient, but I think I should be pretty clear. On space, one, their Pitot and Hitchens evidence cites how the United States has already invited Japan to do space cooperation, results in two ways. A, they can fund the U.S. development of offensive weapons if they can develop defensive weapons for the alliance, and others can develop offensive weapons, so there's no reason to vote for them. Second, other cooperation solves, as Irwin 22 writes, that the United States, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, New Zealand, and the UK have signed a joint vision document that calls for greater cooperation. Three, Japan is already militarizing, as Wilson 20 finds. Japan's 2018 National Defense Program guidelines call for the capability to disrupt opponents' control and communications to ensure superiority in space. Japan is in the midst of a rapid space militarization, softening the distinction between non-military and military space capabilities. Four, there is no reason why offensive deterrence is key. Their evidence is literally setting the U.S. Space Force. Five, turn on a space race, as Hayes 22 finds that Tokyo is capable of undertaking space-oriented responses that would arouse the ire of China. There is not a space race currently underway between Beijing and Tokyo, but it would be most unfortunate to participate in one. Helbutcher 1 writes that a buildup of space weapons that could make war inevitable. The dizzying speed of space warfare would introduce intense use-or-lose pressure into strategic calculation. Six, turn it again on miscalculation, as Blatt 22 writes that strategic miscalculation is uniquely likely in space. It's much easier to hold an adversary space systems in jeopardy with destructive ACAT than it is to substantially defend a system, which increases the risk that their actions are perceived as aggressive. Seven, turn on testing. Grego 19 writes that testing anti-satellite technology can have profound ripple effects. The destruction of a single large satellite in low Earth orbit could more than double the amount of debris in orbits. On North Korea, one, Japan needs to escalate for the impact scenario to trigger. That's a turn, as the AF allows for an offensive response. The neg doesn't do so, so the only risk of miscalculation is the AF. Second, the Vogel evidence we read in our case functions as a turn. We see that North Korea hates Japan, which is why they would get more aggressive. Rodriguez 1 explains that North Korea has objected. 21 explains that North Korea has objected from any form of rearmament. Japanese military is increasingly pushed for long-range strike ability, supposedly to destroy North Korean missile launchers in the form of preemptive defense. China and both Koreas have understandably viewed this as a provocation. Three, North Korea is a defensive realist. The Wall Street Journal writes that Kim is blocked into a corner, doesn't want to spark wars, missile tests, or just missile tests. Four, other things just check miscalculation, i.e. hotline between the two countries, U.S. satellites and information sharing, and THAAD and BMT systems. Then group both scenarios. They're both about missiles hitting Japan, but if it hits Japan, Article 9 triggers because they've been attacked first. So they don't care about, and so informing doesn't do anything, so you shouldn't vote for them. Then go to the contention about democracy. On the uniqueness about nationalism, one, their evidence is a blog 2 years ago. What Lynn finds is here, while patriotism is high in Japan, there are very few actual nationalists, and nationalist politicians have little power in the status quo prefer because it's a peer-reviewed study. Second, only sections of the LDP are nationalists, as Curry 21 writes that right-wing populism is just the third largest party in the lower house of Japanese parliament. This means that they can't push for the aggressive actions that my opponents claim they will, and you shouldn't vote for them. Third, turn it on increasing nationalist policies. Berger 14 explains that since for right-wing nationalists, ideological issues are part of the parcel of any effort to reform Japanese defense, changes in national security policy were always paired with highly nationalist rhetoric, and changes in other policy domains. Historically, when there have been pressures on Japan to do more defense and national security issues, Japanese conservatives have pushed hard to strengthen Japanese nationalism. For furthest link, Berger's historical analysis of how nationalism has increased in the past in Japan, so it's more probable. On the link about political realignments in a two-party system, one, they operate on a poor understanding of fiat. Affirming means the resolution happens instantly to give us fair and equal ground. Absent that, it's impossible to have any political discussion. Discussions about unfeasible legislation prevents us from discussing anything that isn't already passing, killing all education and controversial issues. Second, the Murata evidence concludes that pushes for nationalism will force rebalancing, writing that the LDP includes different political forces with different ideas and policies, and leaders still function as opposition parties within the LDP. If political forces with social conservative values become stronger, other forces might find it difficult to stay in the LDP and consequently join opposition parties. On the first impact about women, they don't address the root cause, as OI22 finds that traditional gender roles still prevail, significantly reducing the pipeline of women into leadership positions. Men still dominate business leadership in Japan, and policies that really meet women's needs are slow to emerge. On the second impact of war, there is no reason why China would ever attack as long as Article 9 prevents any attack against Chinese territory outright. Our evidence in the case indicates the only time China ever feels threatened historically is when they've been encroached upon by their neighbors. Thank you, and vote neg.
Sorry, real quick, just so you know, we don't read woman in this round. That was past disclosed.
My bad. We can't hear you.
Great. Someone else also said something. I was like, is it just me?
Yeah, I was confused.
What is
I had
going
waited like
on
a full
here?
minute. I was like, I can't hear you at all.
My bad. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my bad. So I'm assuming you heard nothing that I said. Cool. Okay. First off, is anybody not ready? And I'll do this time, like looking. So, okay, cool. Second off time roadmap, frontlining their case. Yeah. Okay. So our case, Here, wait, let me take a sip of water. Okay. I'm gonna get my timer reset. All right. On our first contention, we can see that Japan has already started creating offensive weapons, meaning all their turns would have triggered. We also can see the fact that other actors will do the offensive weapons as well, meaning we can see 2 non-uniques, they get no access to any of the turns they read. On contention 2, first they say that Japan needs to escalate for the impact scenario. No, we tell you that the missiles just need to be faulty. If a missile falls over, then the United States is bound to attack. That's our argument, not that Japan attacks. Then their Vogel evidence, then they try to extend this Vogel evidence, just saying that they're going to trigger the impact. This is just their case. We'll get there. But then they say North Korea is a defensive realist. We're saying that it's literally an accident. It's a missile from a test falling out of the sky. They already do the missile test, but it triggers a United States response because if it lands in Japan, then it's viewed as an attack. Then they say hotlines check miscalculation. Again, it's not miscalculation, and there really are no hotlines between like North Korea and the United States, except on like the DMV, except on the demilitarized zone. But then they just say Article 9 will trigger. Our entire point is that we don't want Article 9 to trigger. We don't want the missile to fall in the first place. We would prefer North Korea not to send missiles overhead of a country and then cause nuclear war. On our contention 3, they say our evidence is a blog. We tell you democracy is declining right now through the Hoffman evidence. It's the 3 biggest newspapers in everything that they read. That means like democracy is declining. That could distort impact. Then they say right-wing populism is really small. Obviously, it's not. It's been growing. That's our entire argument. But then they say that they turn it saying that like right-wing nationalist conservatives like are going to grow. We tell you that the invigoration and then actually trying to pass Article 9 is what creates the opposition in the first place. Then they just say the Murata evidence is like already that the LDP already has internal opposition. That doesn't matter because they all decided in the primaries, meaning they go way more towards ultranationalism. Then on the war impact, they literally just say that like, oh, we're going to trigger it anyways, and like China will only attack if they feel encroached. Nationalism is what creates the encroachment. But then let's go on to their case. At the top, they never become a normal state, triggering or not making sure that none of their impacts trigger. As easily 16 writes it, even if Article 9 were fully amended, Tokyo would retain a pacifist subclause. Japan will not return to militaristic unilateralism because doing so would overshoot more beneficial security strategies that takes them out of everything they read. But then let's go on to their trilateral cooperation. A couple things. First, their impacts take out their link. If North Korea was going to attack, then that means South Korea would definitely still keep Japan for deterrence. Like they're always going to be together on the issue, even if they don't cooperate on anything else. Second, this impact should have already triggered when we saw the reinterpretation of Article 9. It says any movement towards normalization, which has already happened. We didn't see it happen. But third, the change in diplomacy with Article 9. If like it did happen, it wouldn't hurt diplomacy long term, as we've already seen relations go in ebbs and flows. But what does hurt it long term is when you have one party, that means the relationship can never reset. That's the biggest issue. They're just trying to solve the system. We stop the cause. But then you turn the argument because negating would be catastrophic for cohesion, as 12/18 explains it. In light of security threats from North Korea, Japan could shoot down missile via interceptors. South Korea and Japan working together to manage North Korea. That means if Article 9 is amended, collaboration would increase. On the impact, North Korea could never start a war. As Mason 17 explains, that North Korea wouldn't be able to go to war even if it wanted to. It lacks the funds to pay for a sustained military campaign. That triggers our impact because the US is attacking first, meaning they have to retaliate, but it means that we don't end up with a first strike war. But then let's go on to their second link on China. First off, their own pain evidence gives us a uniqueness, saying that China's already expanding, meaning they're already being aggressive, completely taking out everything they read. But second, their own Sinki evidence tells you that the balance is deteriorating with China, meaning that they're gaining the upper hand. Eventually, the turns goes away. We have the only uniqueness, but then you turn it because affirming increases diplomacy in 2 ways. The first is regionalism. Tan 15 writes that Japan's reputation as a regional leader could be jeopardized should its participation in Asian multilateralism be shaped by the US. That's why Patent 10 tells you that Japan's revision of Article 9 will increase its diplomatic influence by being considered a world power achieving global respect. You prefer our evidence over theirs, mainly because we're talking about the whole world. They're talking about like one group, but then their scenario is not unique because Japan is already developing forward strike capabilities. As Real 22 writes that Japan has begun to with more aggressive military capabilities, including cruise missiles. That means their impact would have already happened if they were so worried about offensive military capabilities. For these reasons, never proud to
River Cross.
Yeah, does anybody want a speech doc? I know it's a little fast.
I'm good.
Okay.
Cool.
And then you just take the first question.
That's the doc.
That's good. Oh, Theo does want the doc actually. DT, could you send it while we do cross? Okay, cool. If Japan adopts a pacifism subclause, how do you win your North Korea scenario?
How do we win our North Korea scenario?
Yeah.
Yeah. So our argument is that they can engage in like international disputes. The only thing that they can't do is start a war. So if a missile's going over their heads and outside of their territorial waters, they can strike it. The issue with Article 9 right now is that it has to be explicitly saying that they're going to hit Japan, which will never actually happen.
That's an antidote of populism too.
No, because our argument is a political one.
Like, yeah, but why does
you make a perception argument as well?
If they're remaining pacifists, how does the political system change?
How does the political system change? Because
if
reinterpreting part of a constitution creates some offensive military capabilities. At some point, still does create more offensive military capabilities, which is a perception link into like politics. But what it doesn't do is allow them to go to war. So they're developing offensive capabilities, creating deterrence, which still is opposition because they're revising a constitution.
Sure.
But it doesn't. Yeah, sure. The other part. Do you mind if I take a question? Okay. Let's look. Let's go on your first contention, right? You tell us trilateral cooperation will fall. How long is like how many times do you think South Korea and Japan have had really bad diplomatic relations?
I don't know, not recently.
But would you say since like the end of like the Korean War? Like
well, I mean, that's a very generalized question. I think that recently there's not a lot of tensions between Lee and the Kishida government.
But they've had fallouts, right? Like Abe didn't get along with South
their relationship has never collapsed. The argument that they've had minor disputes having minor disputes does not actually interfere with alliance systems the same way that reinterpretation of Article 9 would.
Let me rephrase the question. Abe specifically said he refused to apologize for comfort women, which is one of the big historical things that you say would cause, like when it's mentioned, you said that South Korea would then stop cooperation. So did they stop cooperation with Japan? When he openly
Our
said
argument does
that
not say that they need an apology. Our argument says that they're okay working with them because they're strategic allies. They've become afraid of Japan when you affirm, because they think the Japanese military can be harnessed against them too because of these past atrocities. Apologies are not important for a government that's focused on real defense.
Wait, but it was important for South Korea. South Korea said it was important. The history that you're talking about.
I mean, obviously you're going to ask for an apology, but I'm saying that in the status quo and historically, the lack of apology has not disabled communications between the two countries, because what's more important to realist governments is actual defense as opposed to things like words. That's our argument.
Okay, we have like 9 seconds left. So how's your morning been?
Oh, that's 2 questions in a row. What the heck, man? But it's been good. I woke up pretty early for this though. All right. We'll run prep. We have 125 taken.
It's gonna be our case and then their case. Anyone not ready? Yeah, it's gonna start at the top of our case. It's gonna start at the top and then concessions on the first going for the second. start on their argument that they're going to retain a passive subclause. One, Abe doesn't want to retain passive subclause. Their own evidence indicates that they're going for militarism because of nationalism of the current Japanese government, which means their own evidence is conceding that they're probably not going to have the subclause. But secondly, our Schumann evidence finds that any constitutional revision changes the perception in China that Japan is remilitarizing, because I think the constitution is specifically what was keeping them checked, which is why all constitutional revision, which is just A9, triggers our link. On trilateral cooperation, we'll concede that Noka never goes to war because it's not in their incentive, so none of the terms link. On South Korean, on the Chinese strike, they read the pain evidence. It's trying to say that it's causing expansion, but one, the expansion is small scale, and two, it's not territorial, which is why there have been 50 years of no conflict in our brand evidence funds. Bentley evidence funds, there's been only expansion from China when they feel like they're back into a corner. They say that our Sankey evidence finds that they're already offensive, but they can't attack China, which means even though they have an offensive military that could scare them, they don't, because they don't have the ability to attack. They give two terms, neither of them are really warranted. Their first one's regionalism, saying there's going to be more region, there's going to be more cooperation post-AF. One, our Mason evidence turns this against them and saying that regional actors only work with Japan because they're seen as a stable economic ally. And when you change Article 9, you change that perception, which means no one will work with them. But secondly, our Chen evidence finds regional actors and Japan were all too weak to stop China's rise. Then on the, they say that there's going to be first strike missiles that'll stop China. One, these cruise missiles aren't ballistics, which means they can't reach the Chinese territory yet. But secondly, it doesn't matter if these missiles exist if they can't be used against China. Our Vogel's evidence is very specific that the reason they'd be mad is because they remember war crimes, and reinterpretation scares them they're going to use weapons. Weapons existing right now doesn't stop anything, which is why our stepping evidence finds when you change Article 9, it leads to the perception in China that there's going to be war, which is either that they need to attack first or else they're going to be attacked, which is why our Wadsworth evidence finds they conduct a first strike. It's the most probable thing. It's their modus operandi. And our Holmes evidence finds that this would be a successful first strike, while our Payne evidence finds it would draw in the US and cause hundreds of millions in deaths as this conflict escalates globally. Go to their case. First, we can outweigh both their arguments because the first strike outweighs on time frame. It happens before any change in capabilities, which means they can't preempt it, and it's definitely the first thing that happens. It happens as soon as you affirm on the perceptual signal sent for the Vogel evidence. On North Korea, one, they don't interact with the Vogel evidence again. It finds that North Korea and other countries in the Korean Peninsula are scared of Japan and angry if they remilitarize because of past war crimes, which means North Korea will be mad and lash out for the Rodriguez evidence, which one causes an independent war scenario because it's an incentive for conflict, but two definitely means they still shoot missiles over Japan because they're willing to take miscalculation risks or risks of them being shot down because they hate Japan. But secondly, their argument is still a miscalculation argument. It requires missiles to fall out of the air, which means if a missile just falls out of the air and hits Japan, Japan is probably going to use hotlands to not escalate into major conflict with North Korea because obviously it's not in their incentive. Then finally, then on their second argument, nationalism, one, can see, go for the burger turn. It says that whenever there's increases historically in changes in militarization, it leads to more nationalist rhetoric that happens post-policy. They just say it creates opposition, but no, the opposition doesn't matter. They're just going to change the policy, which is more important than the political consensus because the LDP is already in tower, can already change stuff. Secondly, they can see the fiat response. There's no change in the deliberation or the two-party system because the second you affirm, there's going to be the Article 9 passing, which means there isn't time for massive political shifts because Priya makes that not happen.
Sorry, real quick. Vogel's in case, right? Your Vogel evidence.
Yeah, Vogel's in case. It's the first piece of evidence.
Okay.
But Rodriguez gives similar warranting and some rebuttal too.
All right,
Specific to
sure.
Rodriguez.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll take some running prep starting now.
All right, 230 used, so we have 9 seconds left.
We have 19 seconds left. Yep. Okay. Cool. So brief off-time roadmap. It's just gonna go their case, our case. All right. Is anybody not ready? Okay. Let's start on their Vogel evidence for a second. We tell you Japan has said that they already believe in them doing the preemptive strike is fine. Under Article 9, they have the offensive capability to do so. That means China knows that Japan can act first right now. The perception already exists and their impacts don't trigger. But then onto China specifically. Again, their pain evidence gives us the uniqueness saying that China's already expanding right now, meaning we hold the only solvency. They just say the expansion is small scale, not territorial, but the evidence doesn't say small scale. China doesn't want to attack. But then their own Sankey evidence tells you the balance is deteriorating with China gaining the upper hand, meaning they just can't eventually do the deterrence, won't be above. They just say that Japan can't attack China. We'll get to that in a second. But then this is key. We're going to give you the Panton 10 turn, which is conceded that Japan's revision of Article 9 will increase diplomatic influence while being considered a world power, and it achieves global respect while they champion pacifism. This is going to take out their Vogel evidence, one, because it gets conceded, which means Japan's going to be championing pacifism, not going to get the preemptive strike happening. Why would Japan think that the preemptive strike is happening if they're like going with for pacifism? It doesn't make any sense here. But then let's go on let's go to Japanese nationalism for a second. They read the Burger turn that there'll be more national prehistoric policy and stuff. We're going to concede that no political shifts were ever going to happen and that the LDP is already the nationalist policy. They have no link in the turns here, but the place you're voting for us and voting on this round is on North Korea. They give you 2 responses here. First, they say we don't interact with Vogel, and they read their turn again. Their North Korea impact scenario turn again. They kicked out of their impact scenario for the NOCO link, which means they don't get access to their turns. Then the only weak argument left is that hotlines are going to prevent this. Again, it's not a hotline. This is a legal argument. The hotline isn't going to stop this. It's an if X happens, Y happens. If the bomb hits Japan, US is legally obligated to fight back. It isn't a perception link. It isn't anything but a legal argument. If X happens, Y happens, that's going to be key here. That's why the BBC and Jones evidence from C3 stipulate that North Korea started to launch the missiles over Japan again, because with the Article 9 in place, Japan has no capacity to strike them down because they're restricted to self-defense unless the missiles are literally earmarked for them. We're going to be going through our second link of error as the Farrell 17 evidence tells you that if NOCO's untested accident-prone missiles accidentally infringe on Japan's sovereign territory, the US would have to retaliate, sparking a roar. Remember, if X happens, then Y happens. The result is going to be a devastating nuclear war, with the Wickman evidence telling you it's going to cause extinction. Here is the key weighing that wins us the round. The reason you prefer this impact scenario over everything in the round is that it doesn't require us to go into the heads of foreign powers. The US has to respond with weapons. That means it completely outweighs on probability because you don't have to go to the psyche of another country to vote on this. A good example is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In the February topic, half the authors that were read on one side were saying that the conflict would happen and the invasion would happen. Half the authors say that it wouldn't happen, which means the probability is always going to be questionable. But on our case, you should feel really comfortable voting here because you know if the missile hits Japan, the US will strike back, causing the nuclear war that is going to cause the extinction. That is why we're proud to affirm.
Cross, you find yeah. Just to clarify, is your argument that we have less probability than you because authors conclude against us?
No, our argument is that for you to win, right, you have to go into the head of Xi Jinping and you have to get whatever he's thinking, and you have to have scholars be able to put it out. The reason why we're able to have turns on your argument, and the reason, let's say literally the exact opposite of what you
read a single turn as to why China would be less aggressive?
Panton, we tell you that like it increases.
Panton's about Japan making regional coalitions with non-China actors. You don't read any arguments that China would be less aggressive in the affirmative.
It increases peace, and we literally in our case, like we tell you that.
Yeah, your Panton evidence is
like either way, for your argument to be true, your authors have to be correct that this is exactly how Xi Jinping thinks. We don't have to prove this is how somebody thinks.
That's not true.
All we have to prove is that under NATO, they have to respond. And considering that that's never been attacked in the round, we know that has to happen. Where your argument, it's going into the psyche of one person, seeing what they think, which we know people really can't do from just like public
So
speeches. that-
here's why your analysis is wrong on both fronts. One, we don't need to get in Xi Jinping's head. All we need to do is give a reasonable understanding of the Chinese population's fears, because if the Chinese population is existentially afraid of Japan, then they can push leadership to do whatever they want. But more importantly,
Wait.
your argument that legal
hold on.
obligations are a guaranteed fact, let me give both explanations. Your argument that a legal obligation is a guaranteed fact is a terrible argument, because the US breaks international law all the time. We did it with both invasions in the Middle East. We always do it on major laws in the sea. We do it on most UN conventions. There's no reason why being told to do something means that we're going to evade, especially if that causes the kind of destruction that you mean for literally no reason. It's just an accident.
First off, on the first one, the Chinese population doesn't really have much of a say of what the government does, considering that they're not democratic. Also, they shut down the biggest city of Shanghai and nobody's allowed to go anywhere. I don't think the people wanted that. But on your second reason, right, we're telling you that it's through NATO. Historically, they don't break NATO agreements. It's not international law like the UN human rights.
How is
like
it
the US
defending
breaks
Japan
that
through NATO?
But through NATO, it says because Japan is a NATO partner, that means the US has to attack. Like it's in the
But they're
evidence you
not.
can read.
Can I ask you a question quickly? Just to keep you to this, the three responses on our case is Japan has the ability to first strike now, China's already being aggressive now, and the pacifism turn.
I think we had one more. I think
No,
okay.
yeah, those are the three.
Those are three.
Sorry.
Those are the three. So those are the only. Those are the three responses.
Patent.
All right, cool.
Yeah, patent.
Patent about pacifism. Cool. That's cross, I think. Give or take. We have 15 seconds. All right, cool. Weighing debate, our case, their case. I'm going to start on their probability weighing and then reiterate Theo's weighing. So I don't know if that makes your sign, but the flowing kind of tricky. On the probability weighing, about miscalculating more probable because we can't get in Xi Jinping's head. One, we would argue that intentional strikes are always more probable than non-intentional strikes, given that you have to pull the trigger on purpose. Theirs requires intervention of non-factors just exploding. Two, if we win case, we win 100% probability. That's how debate works. Three, they don't really evidence that Xi Jinping wouldn't be aggressive, so there's no reason to vote on this. Then extend our time frame weighing that our strike happens before anything else, because there's going to be aggressive first strike postures which happen before Japan can get any capabilities to defend themselves, which A, links into their case to create the same war they talk about the draws in the United States, just at a shorter time frame, but B, triggers the same impact. There will be much more miscalculation in the region if there is a global war. Cool. So go to our case. If we win it, we clearly win the round. The first thing they say is that Japan has the ability to first strike China now. One, this is new, and two, they can't use this ability because they're constrained by Article 9, which means there's no reason China would be threatened by this. And they say that China is expanding now. One, it's a small scale expansion per the pain evidence, but two, there's no explanation as to why this is defense in our case, even if China is escalating in small places like in the South China Sea. That one does not lead to war, and two does not the same thing as a Japanese first strike which draws in the United States. The last thing they read is this pacifism turn. One, they've conceded that Abe wanted Article 9 regions to be militaristic per their own evidence, so there will be. Two, they consider the Mason evidence that no one will work with Japan in the world where you affirm, because all their economic leverage is gone because people are afraid of them no longer being pacifists. But three, this is a perception that is shared among countries, but not among China, so it does not take us out of our argument. At which point, extend our argument per Beckley that China is a defensive realist who only gets upset when they feel encroached upon, but because of historic fears with Japan, they will use a first strike capability to eliminate Japan's capabilities to strike them, because they are irrationally afraid. As such, our evidence indicates that this first strike would draw in the United States per their own warranting, lead to for tit-for-tat escalation, which our pain evidence will kill 100 million people in a conventional war. Go to their case. Extend the Vogel evidence that no three is equally scared for the same reasons as China, and the Rodriguez evidence indicates that would increase escalation. They say they can go to a full-scale war. That's fine. Theo's implication in summary is that they would increase missile testing, which means there's on-net more missile testing and on-net more capability for miscalculation. Conceded. Also extend the argument about there being hotlands that check back. They say that it's in the law. It's in the law. There's an on-purpose strike. As long as there's an accidental strike, and North Korea can clarify that with the United States, there will never be a U.S. draw. Also pretty convincing. So it's pretty clear. Vote for the F. We're not the F. Vote for the neck.
All right, we got 19 seconds of prep. We're going to run it.
All right, that is prep. It's a brief off-time roadmap. It's going to start with the weighing. Then it's going to go our voting issue one on our voter issue on North Korea, and then it's going to go like their case. Is anybody not ready? Okay. This round has been super messy. Let's first start with the weighing. Let's say you give both sides 100% probability of their impacts. You still always prefer us for two reasons. One, we tell you that it's in law, meaning that the US has to do it. Theirs relies on scholars being right about psychology. They just say in debate it's how 100% works. What we tell you is that you always have more certainty on a US commitment than you do on what somebody wrote in a private journal that nobody has. But let's go on to North Korea. First, they say we don't interact with Vogel. This is their evidence from case, meaning it doesn't happen. They read this new implication in final saying that there's more testing. Our argument is that the only reason testing is bad is that when it goes over Japan, which stops happening when you pass Article 9. At that point, you're voting for us. But then they say this law thing doesn't make sense. This is new in final focus. But B, we tell you that the US has to launch it immediately, meaning that there's no time for hotlines, there's no time for anything. It's immediate. That is our feral evidence. At that point, you extend the BBC and Jones evidence from C3, who stipulate that North Korea has started launching missiles over Japan again with Article 9 in place, because Japan has no capacity to strike them down. When you affirm, that changes. Here's the issue, is our feral evidence tells you that if a missile fails over Japan, you end up with all-out war, which our Wickman evidence tells you causes extinction. That's our case, but let's go to theirs. They just tell you that we read this new thing, that we read this new attack saying that they can use preemptive. Our real evidence says it came from the Japanese Defense Ministry saying that they can. This wasn't new. This was in my rebuttal. The reason why you buy this is because the perception is that Japan can strike back, or they can strike first, meaning if they think China is going to strike, they will in either world, meaning they feel pushed into a corner. But the second piece is the non-unique campaign. We tell you the uniqueness here, saying that China is already expanding right now, meaning we hold the only solvency. They just say it's small scale. It's not small scale. Their evidence doesn't say it's small scale. That's just an analytic they decided to have. For these reasons that we're proud to award.
Great round, you guys.
Great round. Great round.
Good round.
Is anyone still waiting to submit?
Judge McCrary, I don't think we can hear you.
I'm in, but it still says panel decision incomplete.
Can you all hear me now? Okay, cool. I think the decision is up. Is the third judge here, just to be sure?
Yes. So
Cool.
I think I just sent in.
Awesome. I can go ahead and announce the decision if that works. Okay. Congrats to both teams. Getting to office of TSC is obviously really hard and a really big accomplishment. The decision was a 3-0 for the negative from Min South. So big congrats. I can go ahead and start real quick. There are a couple of reasons that I feel pretty reluctant to vote off of the AFCase offense. The first is this hotlines response. The way that it's initially frontlined in second rebuttal is to tell me no real hotlines exist between America and North Korea, and they only exist in the DMZ. First summary just says this doesn't respond very well, that like some hotlines still exist and NOCO can still like clarify with Japan. The second summary goes for this new frontline, like really, really hard about a legal obligation. I think this is mildly bad because now they only really have one speech to like engage with the idea that like no hotlines can solve or matter because of this like legal obligation sort of superseding like any type of hotline. I think it's reasonable for them to say in first final focus that North Korea will want to clarify any accidents on a hotline before World War starts, regardless of legal obligations. Second final just says like, I don't really think there's any like warranted engagement with the hotlines response. It's just like, it's illegal, it has to happen. I don't really know why. And second final also sort of says the response is new in final focus about like hotlines, again, like and how it interacts with the legal obligation. To the extent it's new, I think it's only new because like the legal stuff is new in second summary. Like it's not the front line that's made in second rebuttal. So at the end of the debate, I don't really know why legal obligations sort of supersede any type of hotline communication. I feel like it's coming late enough in the round where I'm comfortable airing neg to at least substantially reduce the risk of the AC link. Then on the Vogel stuff, the frontline in second summary is just that they kicked out of the impact scenario in case. I don't really know like which or why like the responses on case deal with Vogel's uniqueness claim that North Korea is scared of past Japanese war crimes. All of this to me is like pretty well articulated in first summary, like and in rebuttal, like as a response, like to the case independently. It's extended well enough in summary and in first final for me to be very skeptical of the second final front line that goes like, this is from case, it doesn't happen. Again, I don't know why. And B, like tells me the testing implication is new. I don't really think that's true. Like the 8-point implication that's in summary, I think like for a long time is that like like North Korea is more likely to shoot missiles because they are scared of past Japanese war crimes. Like that feels pretty clear to me in the summary speech. Yeah, and then the last thing is like tests won't go over Japan anymore if we revise Article 9. But again, I don't understand how this engages with like the sort of Vogel uniqueness. I just think this is like a bit undercovered, because if I take Vogel to be true, then it's like they do want to do it intentionally, even with Article 9. In fact, they are more scared of Article 9 because of past Japanese war crimes. Again, I think that there just needs to be more clarity here in a multitude of ways for me to feel comfortable like with either of these responses being 100% frontlined by the AF. Then on the neg case, the two responses collapsed on in final. Honestly, pain is like mildly frustrating for me to evaluate, because I guess I'm being asked to evaluate whether like the small text makes the claim that the expansions are like big or small. Like, I don't know, like the highlighting is just like the terminal impact, right? And then like, there isn't really like a recutting or highlight. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be reading. I don't know if I'm supposed to read small text. I'm just inclined to err on the side of the better explanation. I think first summary and final spend more time here to tell me that like, the current expansion is not sufficient to initiate conflict the same way a preemptive strike would with revision of Article 9. And that Bentley says that China will only commit to that sort of aggressive interaction if they feel cornered by things like a revision. I think this sort of like uniqueness claim that the AF is making with pain would at least demand like some sort of recutting or telling me where it is. I don't know like where in the small text it is, and I looked even for a bit. Yeah, the last thing is the defense ministry thing that honestly, as far as I can tell, is not read in the rebuttal speech. Like it's in the doc, but the last thing that I flow from the rebuttal speech is the second turn about like cruise missiles. I do not flow the last response in the rebuttal speech. I thought like first final was right that it was new. I think I'm like pretty okay at flowing. But I mean, I could be wrong, but I guess I didn't think I was. So I thought it was new in second summary. I think that it's the response that like they're constrained by Article 9 is reasonable. So I guess I think that neg wins case, and I feel comfortable negating off the China scenario, and that's how I voted.
Okay, I can go next. I also voted neg. So I think that the neg is just ahead on the description of like China's motivations in terms of attack versus expansion type questions. And I just think that they did a better job of being like, yes, expansion, inevitable. It's small, it's low level, it's not aggressive necessarily towards Japan, but Article 9 flips that. And I thought that that was kind of clear and or consistent. I have a lot of problems with the AF's North Korea situation because I think that there are some arguments that the neg does not capitalize on that you definitely need to capitalize on. So for instance, the scenario is like North Korea shooting missiles over Japan now. One of those will accidentally hit Japan and draw in the United States, retaliation, war, etc. If it is true, and then they ask like Article 9 means that North Korea would no longer do that. If that is true, that North Korea would change its tests based on Japanese rearmament, like why wouldn't they do that knowing that the United States is going to attack them if they shoot a missile and it hits Japan? Like your impact scenario is that the US would get involved and it would cause a war. But if that's the case, and North Korea knows this, North Korea is still shooting its missiles over Japan. It is trying to be provocative. Like its goal is to do that. So I'm not sure if that also wouldn't change in the world of like Japan Article 9 revision. Now, I'm not saying that this is an argument that the neg made, and I'm not saying that the neg is like winning on this particular thing, but it does kind of call into question some of the other like motivations and things like accidents, like, you know, all of those things in comparison to like what is going on in the China thing just seems like whatever is going to happen with North Korea shooting missiles is like an inevitability. And the only kind of real sort of posture that Japan could make it worse or change it is if Japan were to militarize, because then it would give North Korea justification for what they are doing. I didn't really read too much into this hotlines thing. This is an accident, but I don't think it's like as clear cut as you say. That's like accident happens, US intervenes. That's just not how anything works. The MDT doesn't get activated in like an instant. That's something that like the US has negotiations with Japan about, and then devises some sort of response plan if that were to occur. And I guess in the intervening moments, they could like call up North Korea, but there's no chance that North Korea is going to be like, whoops, it was an accident. Our missiles are crap. Like, that's not going to happen. North Korea is going to be like, yeah, we meant to do that, even if they didn't. So hotlines just doesn't really seem like here or there for me in terms of de-escalating conflict, but it did seem like there is a possible chance that North Korea could become more provocative in the world of Article 9 revision, not less. But I definitely think that Article 9 revision would trigger China. And the other thing I was sort of, concerned about is like the AF's framing of like, we have legal precedent versus you have like some theory about defensive versus offensive realism. I think that NEG needs to push back on this. And like, it's even described in some of the last speeches as like somebody's diary. Like, again, not how international relations works. Like, policy analysts study the policy moves and like military strategy of China as a whole and its actions. This isn't like the thoughts and hopes and fears of Xi. This is like all of the PLA white papers, the internal working documents. And so I think that the NEG shouldn't let the AF sort of get away with that kind of framing as well. So, that's kind of how I landed on things.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a last judge to give a comment here. I think that this is a really challenging topic for F. It's a little bit tough, and both teams did a great job overall. But from what I have heard from next side, I think what I'm convinced is that the threat of revision, basically that revision will cause a threat to the world, not just China, North Korea reaction to the changes. Also mentioned, you mentioned here, even South Korea, right? So from history, a lot of Asia countries still very sensitive to how Japan's offensive capabilities in the future, even though it's 70 years ago. So I think you present some argument on how South Korea would respond, right? This is, I think, is a very, very important point. And then I think in the crossfire from F, I think the main point F presented was, according to Article 9, if Japan is attacked, so the United States will legally respond, right? That would cause a nuclear war in the world. But I do not say that, it must be true, So from the information, from evidence you have presented, I think Negative also did a good argument on today's Japan already has enough capability for defensive actions, even though if there is air happens, like North Korea missile, Japan should be able to defend themselves, right? Themselves, or as needed, as necessary, U.S. can take action as well. So that's a good argument. So overall, I think NEG need a little bit better.
Okay, thank you guys all so much for judging. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
luck, you guys.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.